It's been great these 3 weeks to reflect on our centenary. We are 100 years old as a church, 1924. This church was founded in November of that year, and in November of this year, we will celebrate 100 years of our existence. And as we thought about this year and we thought about the centenary, we wanted to reflect on how we could celebrate that and how we could reflect on that as a church and what we could learn from it. So one of the things we wanted to do was these centenary lectures. And from Maldwin, the first week, where he's reflected on the 1924 period, right through to David's era. And then David took on last week and made us laugh and was very honest, I feel. Some would say too honest. But it was a really nice talk last week, just to reflect on. David has been here for 30 years. If you're thinking a 100-year-old church, he's been here for a third of it, not bad. And my job tonight is to take you from that slight overlap of 1999, which is when I came here, and up to the present day, and just to reflect maybe on some of those lessons from the last 100 years. I thought it'd be nice to start with if we show a video of the history of the church. Many of you will have seen this video, but it puts nicely in pictures some of the things that Maldwin and David remembered and showed pictures of over the last couple of weeks. So we'll start by turning our eyes on the screens and watching this history of the church video.
Our church story first began 100 years ago in 1924, when Geoff Lee, the founder of Elim, held a series of revival and healing meetings in Plymouth. Many people in the city found faith, and Plymouth Christian Centre was born. The church first met at Willoughby's Iron Foundry on Rendell Street, which is now Larry Spear's warehouse. They met here for over 10 years until it was bombed during the Second World War. During this period, the church had to meet in a series of temporary locations. They first met in Stonehouse Town Hall, until this building was also bombed. They ended up having a church in the foyer of the Grand Theatre on Union Street, followed by a short move to Good Bodies Cafe on Mutley Plain. After the war had ended, the church met in an old Methodist church on Emma Place, where they continued to meet until 1956. Through the sacrificial giving of the church congregation, they were then able to buy their own church building on Knott Street. They got to the stage where this building was full every week, with young people sitting on the stairs and windowsills. So in 1983, they made the move to our current church building on Embankment Road. It needed a lot of work, which the congregation did themselves, meeting every Saturday. They soon saw this building full of people. Over the years, the building had grown tired, so in 2010, we renovated the outside of the building, and in 2013, we transformed the inside. The refurbishment was a significant step for the future of the church, and established something great for future generations to build upon. We have continued to meet at Embankment Road for over 40 years now, driven by our vision and desire to love and serve people, enabling them to become wholehearted followers of Christ. We have had thousands of Sunday services here, not to mention the range of groups, events and activities that go on throughout the week. This year we celebrate our centenary, 100 years since our church first began. We thank God for all that He has done in this time, and for all the pastors, leaders, volunteers, individuals and families that have served Him and experienced His love through our church.
So I think that's a really nice little visual recap, isn't it, of some of the history of the church and the journey that we've been on. 100 years, and it's all been plain sailing. With no problems whatsoever, no conflicts, no ups and downs, just constant growth and blessing. And obviously that's not the case, and I think David particularly highlighted that last week, and some of the ups and downs of church life and church family and of a church, of any church. Eugene Peterson calls it, when he refers to Israel's walk with God, the saw-tooth history of Israel. He says, on our best days, we are at best poor performers. And so I reflect tonight perhaps on a few personal kind of reflections and memories of when I came, and on the past 25 years, and maybe to draw some lessons or some thoughts, some overriding themes of things that we might consider as we look at the juncture that we find ourselves at now. I was invited to come here in 1999. David was the senior minister here. He'd been here for 5 years, and he knew me from when I was a student at Nottingham University, where I went to his church there in Beeston and attended there for a few years. And David wrote to me, and I was thinking about my future and what I was going to do. Jenny and I got married in 95, and things were not going very well in the church that we were in Germany. It was a very large church. We were very involved in it, and as volunteers, not as full-time staff. But a lot went wrong in that church, and there was a lot of kind of abusive leadership, overpowering leadership, and the church was in decline, and we were on the verge of leaving and thinking about coming back to the United Kingdom. And at that time, around that time when we expressed that, and we'd been in touch with David and Jean, we came to Plymouth to visit on a tour of the UK. We explored the possibility of coming here. David wrote to me and invited me to come and be the assistant pastor, and I wrote him back and said, I don't think I will come to Plymouth, and I'm probably going to go to London and study in a Bible college there, and we were just considering our future. And at that time, we went to a meeting in Frankfurt in Germany, and a man was speaking there called Dale Gentry, who was a prophet from the United States, and there were a few hundred people there. It wasn't our church, it was 2 hours away from where we lived, but we just went to this meeting, and on that particular night, he picked us out, he pointed at us, and he called us forward, and he said, God is calling you and setting you apart for the work of the ministry, and you will have a teaching ministry, and you will teach many people. And so he gave us this very specific word at that time of our life when we were thinking about the future and thinking about coming to the UK and contemplating what would happen next. So all of that to say that I got to the point where I did, even though I wrote back to David and Jean and said, we're not going to come, I felt somehow, I'm sure it was a prompting of God to reconsider that decision. And so I flew over, and I got on a bus in London, and I remember it was late at night, and I was half asleep, and I was lying on this coach, coming down to Plymouth to interview and to talk to David and the elders, and I just felt Psalm 139 just came out of nowhere into my head. Even there on the far side of the sea, your hand will guide me and hold me and lead me. And it came from nowhere. I wasn't thinking of it. It just popped into my head. And I did feel that God was beginning to speak to me. And so we interviewed. I had a Chinese with the elders, which was very uncomfortable, and I felt I was being scrutinized, and which I was. But we came in 1999, 25 years ago. In June I came. Jenny came a month later in July, and we joined the team here. And those early years were quite difficult. We rented a house in Honignoll for 6 months, and the initial roles that we had, where I was brought in to do the cell groups, to lead the cell group ministry of the church, the small groups that David talked about last week, with an emphasis on, this was kind of tacked on, with an emphasis on young people, and so I did that and started to develop that role and the team there. The first 2 years I found really, really difficult because there wasn't much definition and I didn't really know what I was doing, and we'd come out of this very difficult situation in Germany. And so I didn't feel great in myself. I didn't feel like I was on fire. I didn't feel ready for ministry. I just felt like it was a real struggle. And my memory of the church back was then, it wasn't full. There was just maybe the back of the balcony would be a smattering of people. It wasn't filled down the sides. But it was in a decent state. And David, I think, had done the hard graft of starting to fix the church that was a bit broken and difficult. And when I arrived, there was no staff team either. So there was David, there was the secretary, Marlene, and then there were no offices, there was no team, and so my desk was sitting next to the photocopier, I just didn't really know what I was doing, and I've struggled for a couple of years to really just get into the role of being here on the team. There was around that time, or fairly early on in our time here, we were on holiday in the States, and we decided that we wanted to go up to Toronto to this Toronto blessing that David mentioned last week that was so controversial at the time, but was causing a real move of God around the globe, really. And so on our own initiative, we flew up to Toronto from Florida, where we were on holiday, and David and Jean came over and met us there, and we went to some of these meetings at Toronto Vineyard Airport Church. And I remember we had maybe the best part of a week there, and it was very intense. A lot of people were getting prayer. There was a lot of noise. There was a lot of laughter. People were falling over. And I just felt that I was completely untouched by it. I didn't feel anything. When people prayed for me, I didn't feel anything. I felt frustrated at some of the meetings, that my lack of feeling, my lack of experience of God in some way. But as we just really just sought God and said that we wanted something more of God. And so we went through these meetings, and Jenny felt very similar. But when we got back, it was when we got back to the UK that I really felt a difference in our hearts and lives. And if you remember at that time, those of you that knew Jenny, she started to shake violently for a month. She shook for a month. People thought she was ill. They thought she had a condition. But she had been just touched by God in such a way that she would shake in the presence of God. And I remember as well when I was preaching that I felt a great difference. And I remember one Sunday afternoon, I was preparing a message for Sunday night. It was a bit late in the day. And I remember that week I preached on Naaman, and Naaman being dipped under the water. And I just felt during the preparation, I just felt the anointing of God on that message, and I just felt an easiness to the preparation, and I preached it with such power, not my power, but I just felt it was so easy to preach it. And at the end, I felt such kind of conviction that I just said, if you want to become a Christian tonight, stand up. And 10 people stood up, and that night, and I just felt like, and then we would take the core leaders away and to Buckfast Abbey, and there was a sense of the presence of God there. We had some really powerful meetings, and it felt like a bit of a personal turning point, and it affected us deeply at that time. And so we built again the youth team at that time, and led the cell groups, and started to build a staff team as well. And different people started to come on staff, and the team started to be built. And that led us to 2009, when there was a time of transition, which is when I would start to take over the senior leadership role of the church, and David would step back into the kind of an associate role, part-time retirement. And I felt at that time, when I took over, we were helped very much by Wynne Lewis, who was the general superintendent of Elim at that time. And he would come down and meet with us as an eldership, and he would discuss with us how we were going to transition the leadership of the church, which wasn't necessarily an easy thing to do and hadn't been done very well in many places. But we spent time as an eldership, and we spent time with Wynne. We spent time talking about some of the difficult issues of what that looked like and the timing of it, and how I would boss Dave around and be his boss, and just what that would look like as a team. We started to look. I took over then in 2009, and I really felt that God spoke to me at that time. I was on holiday, and I was in France, and I was in a forest, and I saw this old stump of a tree in the ground, and I saw these roots growing out of it, these shoots growing out of this old tree. And that phrase came to my mind, which became a bit of a theme in the early days of my leadership, was old roots and new shoots. Old roots and new shoots. And I felt very much that we had to honor the old roots of this church, and the kind of the powerful Pentecostal experience, and all that had gone before, and all those faithful servants of God and all that we saw in the video, I felt there's a lot there that is tradition, that is the living faith of our dead fathers and needed to be honored and built on. But I also felt that there would be new shoots of growth and focus, and so I felt very much that that was the essence and the focus of my early years in the senior role. And I focused then on 3 R's. I think I focused on these old roots and new shoots, and I focused on 3 R's that I felt came into my mind and my thinking at that time. And those 3 R's were reaching out in mission, refocusing the ministry, and restoring the meeting place. We had for years thought about what we were going to do with this building. We had looked at warehouses in Honicknoll. We had looked at knocking this down and rebuilding it. We'd looked at extending it. We'd looked at all kinds of plans. But I felt we had to do something, and we had to do it quite quickly. So I then started to look at that. We looked at it as a leadership team, and the first of those, restoring the meeting place. We started on a 2-phase renovation of the church building. We can show you some of those pictures of the building and cycle through. So this is what the church looked like before, with the pews upstairs and the color schemes. And then this is what it looked on the outside. It was tired, it was boarded up, it was dilapidated. People didn't know a church met here at times. It needed some work. And then we went through a major external, first of all, and then internal refurbishment of the church. We knocked out a room here behind the platform, and we can cycle through some of those pictures. And it became a major building site while we renovated from top to bottom. We wanted to add new seats. We wanted to put in new sound systems. We wanted to level the floor. We redecorated. We did everything, and then we renovated as well the outside of the building. So it was a great time of faith and challenge, and it was one of the 3 R's that we focused on at that time, was the restoring the meeting place. And at that time, for those of you who were around, we had to move out, so we moved en masse up to St. Jude's Church, and they were very gracious to us. Tim Smith and the congregation there, they lent us their building, and on Sunday afternoons we would meet, and then we would stay through over tea time, and then we would have another meeting in the evening. So we did that for several months while this place was being renovated. And it did feel like a sense of journey and a sense of challenge and a sense of adventure. The team worked really well on that, leading the children's ministry and the youth ministry, and just the logistical challenges, the tech teams helping set up there on a weekly basis. But it was a good time of challenge, and people also gave very generously, like in those early days that were talked about on the video, where people gave £25 a month or whatever they gave, and they came and helped with the renovation work. We asked people to give. We asked the congregation to give on a regular basis over 2 years, 3 years. Many people gave sacrificially to raise the funds for the 2-phase refurbishment of the church, and we got there, and we also got some grant funding, which was really encouraging towards the cost of all of that. And so we restored the meeting place, and it has served us well. We added extra seats, and it's been a really good renovation for us, and has served us well as a building, and we've made the most of what we've got here. The second I was reaching out in mission, and I felt that we should very much be focused in how we were going to do that, and so at that time we started to partner with Compassion, and we wanted to connect with children through Compassion, and we sent a team over to Uganda, to Kampala, to Katwe, to the slum area of Katwe, and there were 10 of us, I think, went over, and we asked the church to sponsor children at that time, and we raised about 90 to 100 sponsorships. So many people, still to this day, about 100 people, sponsored children on a monthly basis. And then we put together this team to go and partner with this church, with Pastor Paul Kinatama's church in Zambia, Full Gospel Church in Katwe. And we sent a team over to meet all of our children, which was really moving. All of the children sponsored by people in this church. And we put on a fun day with them. We visited the church. We visited the projects that we're running. We visited the compassion offices in Kampala. And we visited the outlying villages. I was able to meet personally the child that we were sponsoring at that time and their family. You could see the environment in which they lived and were growing up. And we also were very inspired by the leadership development program of Compassion, where we met in the evenings. We met people that had come right through Compassion as children, had been brought onto projects, had been fed and housed and educated and given a university education and a leadership development program, and had become lawyers, and were helping the next generation of children to move out of poverty. And what I saw when we went to Uganda was something that was working, children that were coming out of poverty, people that were getting an education and were being introduced to Jesus Christ and the gospel through these church partnerships. And so we've had Pastor Paul come here a few times over the years, and we're looking at, as an eldership, and sending another team out there to connect and to keep connecting with the church there and the partnership that we have with them. And so that was a really good thing to do as well, to reach out in mission. And as part of the reaching out in mission, we also wanted to focus strongly on Alpha. We had this focus on refocusing the ministry of A, B, C, D, and one of those, the A, was Alpha. And I remember making this video that we made, and it was, at that time, we would get maybe 10, 20, 15 people on Alpha in houses, and we started just sell the vision. What would it look like? What would it look like if we could, say, get 80 people on an Alpha? What would that look like? And so we made this video, and we put all these chairs out. We put out 80 chairs, and we talked about the people that we would like to see in these chairs, our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues. And we sold the vision of what it might look like to be introducing people to faith in Jesus Christ, to reach out in mission. And I remember as we led up to that Alpha, just thinking, there's no way we're going to get 80 people. It's a stretch too far, but we've got to aim for something. And then even if we don't get 80, it'll still be great. But people started to invite people, and we got up to 40, and this is encouraging, and we're going to do a Chinese evening, and then we got up to 60, and then we got up to 80, and then we got up to 100, and then we got up to 120, and then we got up to 140, and we were completely overrun. We had that Chinese evening, some of you were here, and we had about 140, 150 people turned up to that Alpha supper, which was unforgettable as we flapped around trying to serve people Chinese food. But that was the start of kind of a focus on Alpha, where we run Alpha 2 times a year. It's become the engine of our church, and it's been really encouraging at the baptisms and to hear story after story after story. I came on Alpha, I was introduced to Jesus, I got to know Jesus, and so that's been a really great thing to focus on that and to develop again and to build on the faithful ministry of the old roots in this church of people like David and Jean and many others who led Alpha courses in their homes and led many people to Christ using that particular tool. And we were just focusing on that with a laser focus. And the third hour was refocusing the ministry. And it just felt like, as well as doing various things in Embankment Road, and we were focusing on a number of things, I felt like we needed to focus on some key areas, and those were Alpha, the biblical foundations of the church, community and developing that, and discipleship. And so that's what we did in that period. And so that was the kind of the foundational vision for that period of ministry and life. It didn't remain, but the 3 R's and the reaching out in mission, restoring the meeting place, and refocusing the ministry. And it was an exciting time. In 2011, then I went on and I did a master's degree in discipleship, how to make disciples of Jesus in the local church. And focused very much on following Jesus as our teacher, as our master, as our companion, and as our model. And within that, there were various things that were very important, I think, to us as a church: companionship, friendship, hospitality, being with people. And out of that kind of work, there were certain ministries that grew, but also the culture of the church continued along that vein. Richard Bunt, at that time, joined the team. He had been an elder for many years, and he took early retirement from teaching. And David highlighted some of his work last week in the development of our kids club ministry, and a very significant time and contribution to the church. And then Richard got sick with cancer, and sadly, very early on in that time, when he was looking at his contribution, which was phenomenal to the church, he died. And we prayed for him to be healed, and we prayed during that time and fasted. But Richard died, and it was a sad time for us to lose him and his leadership. But he, I feel, left a great legacy behind of ministry and input that he had given to the church. And then Paul joined the team at my invitation in March 2015. He was leaving the Navy, and I invited him to join us on the team and to become a minister in training. And that's been a really great development to see Paul growing in leadership over these past 10 years, and to see him working more closely with myself and Liz and the wider team. Dave's 2 retirements came during this time. His first retirement, and then recently his second retirement. But during that time, I feel what we saw was slow and steady growth. And so the sides of the church started to fill up, and people started to, more people came, and it was slow and it was steady, but it felt like healthy growth. And I think the way that the transition worked so well, with myself taking on the senior leadership role and David stepping back into an associate role, was facilitated. We've had numerous people asking us how we made that work. Was facilitated by David's humility, I think, and by his ability to step back and not fiddle too much, or be too much of a backseat driver. And sometimes he'd have a quiet word in my shell, but he's always been very helpful and supportive, and of us and of the wider team. And we saw some really great developments during those years. Liz came on and Matt as our kids zone workers, and as our nursery manager, and we saw the kids zone work really take off. We had about 70 volunteers working in the children's ministries, and the children and the families ministries of the church just blossomed under their leadership. And the nursery had its best years during those years and started to turn a profit and do well and flourish. And the staff team grew. So it was great. During that time, we'd invited Rachel and Hamish onto the staff team as youth pastors. They invited them down from Southport to come and join the team, and we were so grateful that we felt that God spoke to them, and that they came and relocated their family from the north to the south. And that felt like a very significant thing for us as well, and they have contributed greatly to the younger end of the church and the youth work, and we have seen the children's work and the youth work flourishing and growing, and the family ministry of the church growing. And again, I think it's an old root of this church that we've always had really good children's ministries. Maldon mentioned in his first week Hattie Shepherd, this lady that served the children through the wartime years and would turn up regardless every week and serve the children. And throughout the years, there's been different named ministries, but there's been a great ministry to children and to young people. And it's been one of our values as a church to do that and to do it well. And so it's been great to develop that team of children's work and youth work, and then the strong administration. We had Nikki for a number of years, who was a good administrator, and then Emma came on and has been fantastic in that role. She's stepping off that role now, if you've seen the job advertised, and going to study theology full time, but she's filled that gap really well and done a tremendous job as church administrator and served us well in that role. And it's been really exciting to go full circle and to bring Katie on as the children's worker. Katie is the first person that I dedicated as a child when I came on the staff team here, and now she's on our team, our staff team, and developing the children's work and continuing with that, and that's really exciting. And Natalie as well, seeing her develop in her role. She was in our youth group, and then she came and studied at university, and then she's been great in that role as media and communications, and we've seen her developing. So as we've watched the staff team develop and go through different iterations, it's brought with it, along with the great volunteer culture of this church, it's brought with it slow and steady growth, a long obedience in the same direction, with some ups and downs. And I think particularly in the last few years, we've seen some real challenges. We saw COVID, which was just unbelievable, really. And it feels now like a bad dream, doesn't it? It feels like it never quite happened. But it did happen, and we really had to negotiate that as a church. And, meetings with no people here, and just doing it to video camera, everybody in their homes, not able to meet together, and then the rule of 6, and I think it was a nightmare. And it was difficult to negotiate as a church, not just our church, but any church. And there were those in the church that felt we were being too not cautious enough. There were those that felt we were being too cautious, and how to follow the rules, the weekly changing rules that came from government, which was a nightmare, wading through those, what we were allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. We're allowed to sing, we're not allowed to sing. We had to wear masks, we don't have to wear masks. And it was quite a stressful time, really, as a church. And we had to negotiate our way through that. And at the same time, we had an employment tribunal, which caused a considerable amount of conflict in the church. And so it was a very difficult time of ministry, a difficult couple of years, a considerable amount of conflict, and I think, certainly for me personally, the hardest years of being here during that time of COVID and conflict and difficult times. But again, with my joke aside, we've been through 100 years and never had a cross word. These are the ups and downs of church life. And they are the ups and downs of family, actually, because which family never argues or falls out or has difficult times? And so, but what I feel that we did is we came through that time, and we came, I feel, in these last years now, since COVID, into a time of growth and blessing and unity. And I think that's really absolutely vital in any church. And we're grateful for that. And now I think we're facing the challenges of growth. We're full on a Sunday morning pretty much, and we've had some staff changes with Dave retiring, and with Emma retiring, with Donna stepping away from the children's work, and Katie coming on, and so there's changes around there that you've got to negotiate, and we still see we're just singing tonight about the faithfulness of God, and we still see throughout all of this, we see the faithfulness of God. We still see those old roots and the new shoots. And so what I thought I'd just kind of wrap up with in these centenary lectures is maybe some lessons learned and where we're at today, and some of the things that we need to think about as a church as we negotiate the future. And what God might do amongst us. The first thing is, I mentioned it this afternoon at the membership class, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's a phrase by a management consultant called Peter Drucker. And what he's saying there is that the culture of a church overrides everything, actually. You can say you have a vision, you can say you have a strategy, you can say you're going to do this and do that, but the church always reverts to its culture. the way that we do things around here. And if you don't get the culture right, then other things get lost in that. You can have a toxic culture or a bad culture, but if you get the culture right, then things grow out of that. And so I think we've done quite a lot of thought around that. People have changed, you see, down the years. The personnel have changed, and there'll come a time where I've moved on, I'm gone, and somebody else is in this role, and so the people change, the personnel change, the programs have changed. We don't do all the same programs, but the values remain. The values remain that undergird it, the old roots that we still have to work from. Culture is really important, the way that we do things around here. So I wrote a document a few years ago called The Church That I See, and this underlines our thinking and the way that we want to see this church develop and grow. And this is a fuller version of our values, really, of what we value around here. And then we've condensed that down to our 4 values that we show you every week in the introduction video to our service. And I'm sure you all know them off by heart. But the church that I see is a church with old roots and new shoots. A church that merges old and new. A church that is established and innovative. A church that is deep and wide. A church that has strong Pentecostal roots and that believes and preaches and experiences Jesus Christ as our Savior and our healer, our baptizer and coming King. A church that is worshipful and vibrant and full of life. A church that has strong biblical roots and that teaches the Bible faithfully and consistently and creatively and in a culturally relevant way. A church that makes wholehearted followers of Jesus who are constantly growing towards maturity. We want to be a church that's easily and constantly and naturally reaching out to unchurched people. A kind, welcoming, gracious, and authentic church where people can explore and ask questions. We want to be a church for all generations, a church that loves and nurtures children and young people, and that cherishes and honors older people. We want to be a church where people can belong and can experience and be involved in true community. A church that's big enough to impact the city and small enough to care for the individual. We want to be a church where people can be themselves, where they can enjoy the journey and have fun and play their part. We want to be a church that relentlessly and pursues God and his presence. A church that knows God and makes him known. That's the kind of church that we want to be. And we condense those down into those 4 values that we mentioned, that we want to be a Bible-based church that preaches the Bible consistently and faithfully. We want to be a people-focused church that loves people and reaches them with the gospel and disciples them. We want to be a Jesus-centered church. And Chris Apong highlighted this so nicely today in our membership class, that we love Jesus. We want to talk about him. We want to point people towards him. He's all we've got to offer, Christ and him crucified. And everything we do has to lift up Jesus and his name. And we want to be that kind of church, because in this day and in this age, that's what's going to attract people, is the gospel, is Jesus. And we want to be a spirit-led church, that we want to be that Pentecostal church that still has these old roots from the Jeffries brothers and their Pentecostal revivals of 1904 and all that went through those years and those massive meetings in the drill hall and those moves of God and the miraculous and the healings and the outpourings of God's Spirit. We still want to be that church. And it will look different. It will be in new wineskins, and it won't necessarily have the same look that it did back in the day. But it will still be a church that is spirit-led. And these are our values. So the first lesson that I would highlight is that that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that the culture of the church is important and is still the same as I think it has always been. The second lesson learned is that church is messy and it's glorious. And this forms a couple of phrases from, again, Eugene Peterson, where he speaks of the mess of congregation. And the fact is that church is messy, that people are messy. And there's a phrase in the Bible, in the Proverbs, which says, where there is no oxen, the manger is clean. But with the oxen comes the increase. And that's a little bit hard to understand at first, but you can have a really clean, neat, and tidy church where there's no oxen, where there's no work, where there's no growth, where there's no culture, there's no agriculture. But with the oxen and the poo of the oxen and the mess of the oxen and the smell of the oxen comes the increase. Where there's people, there's muck. And there's difficulties, and there still is in the church today. There's difficulties, and there's conflicts, and there's arguments, and there's people. But with the people, with the oxen, comes the increase. So church is messy, but the mess of congregation is a phrase that Peterson uses. But church is also glorious, and he speaks in his work of the Shekinah of congregation, the glory of God's people. And I think both those things are held in tension in church life. That if we get to a realistic expectation of what church is and the people of God, is that yes, it's messy, but yes, it's glorious. And where God's people come together, God does amazing things. It's still exciting to sit and listen at a baptism service of how people have gotten saved. It's still exciting to see people getting saved on a weekly basis. It's still exciting to see people who say they drove past on a bus and felt compelled to come into this building. It's still exciting to hear people that come in here on a Sunday and begin to cry in the presence of God and feel touched and moved by the Spirit of God. It's exciting. It's glorious. And sometimes I stand here and I listen to you all singing, and I think of the glory of congregation, the glory of God's people coming together as a habitation for God. And I think if we don't lose sight of that, I think we can do great things. But there's both of those in tension. And I've learned that in the 25 years I've been here, is that every single week church is messy. People in church are a pain in the neck, and God loves them, and God loves us all. It's messy and it's glorious. The third thing I've learned is the difference, and the important difference, between tradition and traditionalism. The tradition is the old roots. It's the living faith of our dead fathers. We have some great traditions as a church, things that have come down through the years, things that we have done well as a church historically, that we build on the shoulders of others. Traditionalism is the dead faith of our living fathers. Traditionalism is stuff that we've always done, but it's a form. It's not got necessarily life in it. So recently, we closed down our nursery, our daycare nursery, Roundabout Nursery, after 38 years of ministry and work amongst children and young people in the families of the area. That form of ministry had come to its natural end. Financially, structurally, it had come to its end, and we needed to close it. But our value behind that, the desire to reach out to families, the desire to reach out to children, the desire to minister to this community has not changed. It will just take on different forms and different wineskins. The wine will be new, and it will be fresh, and it will be lovely, and it will reach out to those children and families and community that we're doing in many ways now. The wineskin needed to change, and so we changed it, and that will continue to be the case. So we have to negotiate this tension sometimes as we look forward at what is tradition and what is traditionalism. What is living faith that we need to hold on to, those old roots, and what is just a form that we can let go and do it in a different way. And that takes discernment, and sometimes it's painful as well for us if we've always done it that way, and we relate to that, and now we're doing this, and that's challenging for all of us, but it's important. And so we need to honor and build on the past, and we need to be led by the Spirit of God. And there's this passage in Hebrews 12 which says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. Let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us." Since we're surrounded by all of these witnesses, those people in that video, the people of the last 100 years, let's run with endurance the race marked out for us. I was running yesterday. I went running. I haven't run for a few weeks. I'm very out of puff and out of form. I went running with the dog. And as I am running along at my top speed, this mother, rather humiliatingly, pushing a pram, no less, ran past me. And trotted along in her lycra, pushing the pram, getting a sweat on. And so she's ahead of me, and me and my dogs, Sam. And so I started to make up this little rhyme in my head. If she can do it, so can we. I started to say it to Sam. People think I'm crazy. If she can do it, so can we, Sam. Come on. Come on, Sam. If she can do it, so can we. And so I would inspire myself by this woman who was disappearing off into the future, pushing her pram. If she can do it, so can we. And this week we honored Steve Northmore. We remembered him. And he's someone that, like many people like Steve and Pauline, who's here tonight, who have served this church so faithfully. Steve nearly killed himself on multiple occasions, fixing these lights and fixing stuff in the ceiling. But no sooner was something broken than Steve had fixed it. And he served on the tech team for many years. But of that generation, there are many like Steve and Pauline, but that have served this church so faithfully. And I think if they can do it, so can we. And I'm running behind them. If they can do it, so can we. And so some of those are disappearing off to glory and celebrating in the presence of God. And they have run a good race. They've really run a good race. And the challenge to us now, I think, a lesson I'm learning, is that our generation coming through and the younger generation, Katie, and others like you, the challenge is on us. The onus is on us. If they can do it, so can we. Since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let's run with endurance the race God has set out before us. Let's serve God in our generation and in our dash between the years. And there are other numerous names that David and Maldwin have mentioned in the last couple of weeks. Old pictures that come up, names that we remember of down through the years, people that have served, people that have done things to make this building possible, people that have given, people that have sacrificed, people that have raised our children and our youth and down through the years. And so I think, I was thinking that yesterday as I was running and telling my dog to keep up, if they can do it, so can we. And the importance of following in these footsteps. Fourth lesson, there's not that many, is life is short. Don't waste your dash between the years. What I've noticed as I look at my greying hair, my bald spot, which people keep pointing out is on the camera in the mornings, that we're all getting older. But life is short and ministry whizzes past. And I want to give my life, we used to sing this, I want to give my life to something that will last forever. And so the challenge to all of us is to get involved and to play our part, because life is short. We get one shot at this. We get our leg of the journey here. We're just part of a chain of people that are serving this particular patch. I like this quote. It's been well read by Theodore Roosevelt. But I think we should think about this. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if she fails, at least fails were daring greatly, so that his or her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory nor defeat. I think we've got to get in the arena and we've got to have a go. And I think in this season we've got to be bold and courageous and try new things. Shakespeare said in As You Like It, all the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players in it. They have their exits and their entrances, their beginnings and their ends. And one man in his time plays many parts, his act being 7 ages. All the world's a stage. We have our entrance, we have our exits, but we have our part to play. That's a lesson I have learned and I am learning, but life is short. 5, and I could tell a Dave joke here, there's only 15 more to go. There's 7 in total. Number 5, the importance of friendship and relationship and conflict resolution. We are a family, but I've heard Nicky Gumbel say this for his role in ministry, but he said what has sustained him throughout the years is friendship and relationship. And I think that's very true. I think the older I get, the more important I think relationships are, and good friendships and good relationships. And I am heartened every time that there is conflict in the church, and when we resolve it, when we fight through it, when we get through difficult times and we face the difficult issues and we come out the other side and we've resolved stuff. And I think the joy of that and the importance of that, the importance of relationship and friendship is not to be underestimated. The companionship of faith. 6thly, the importance and the centrality and the absolute power of the gospel. We need to keep on lifting up Jesus. We need to keep on preaching Jesus. We need to keep pointing people towards Jesus, proclaiming Jesus, Christ and him crucified. If we keep doing that, people will get saved and changed and transformed, and we will move on as a church and see much happen in the name of Jesus. And as long as he is front and center, that is the main thing. And finally, the best is yet to come. Number 7. That sounds like a cliche, and it is in some ways. But the Bible commands us in Ecclesiastes, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Don't say that. So as we look back over 100 years of Plymouth Christian Centre, it's not to say, oh, those were the days, my friend. I thought they'd never end. It's not to be nostalgic in a bad way. I think nostalgia is good, and I think it's good to remember. And I think the Bible is full of commands to remember. But we have to look forward to what God has yet to do. And greater things have yet to come, and greater things have yet to be done in this city. And so we pray the prayer of Habakkuk, which is, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, O Lord. Renew them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. And so what we do is we look back and we thank God. I thank God for the faithfulness of 100 years of ministry in this place. I thank God that we're an older church with a tradition of faith and faithfulness. I thank God for all those that have come before us, and I have heard of their deeds. I have heard of them. I have heard of the times that this church was packed. I have heard of those moves of the Spirit. I have heard of the deeds of the early Pentecostals. I've seen some of it, but not much. Not enough. But the best is yet to come. It will be new wine. It will be new wineskins. But God will do it. God will do it. And so 100 years of Plymouth Christian Centre. There are many other lessons I'm sure I could have drawn out there, but just some reflections on these past years that we've had as a church and where we find ourselves now. And I think we have much to be encouraged by. I'd like to show you a video as we close out. And we showed this at our AGM, so some of you have seen it, some of you haven't. But it's a great video. But what it does is just reflect a little bit on the past year that we've had as a church. But it just shows the amount of stuff that goes on here. The amount of people that are involved, the amount of faithful service that goes on, the volunteerism. And so we'll watch this video, and I hope your hearts are encouraged by it.
As we look back over the last year or so, we want to say a massive thank you to God and all that he has done, and to all of our church family here at Plymouth Christian Centre. Our Sunday services have been going from strength to strength, and we are consistently full on a Sunday morning. We have had some great Bible teaching, looking at the Gospels of Matthew and John, the book of Habakkuk, Galatians, and a definite highlight was the church-wide Inspired series, which we did at both services and with our children and youth. We've seen 15 people being baptised in the last year, and we have another baptism service coming up in a few weeks. Our Christmas and Easter services were standing room only. It was great to welcome so many visitors to our church during these special times. We have also had some great guest speakers, Mark Ritchie, Rob Parsons, Simon Ponsonby, to name a few. And as we have grown numerically as a church, it's been lovely to welcome people and to help them get to know others through our regular Connect lunches. And we have also seen around 50 people attending our membership lunches and becoming members of PCC. Our Connect groups are running well. We now have around 20 community groups and 15 activity groups meeting regularly to build community. Our young adults ministry has also been growing. It's been great to see students joining us. Our children's work saw a big change this last year as Donna, our under 8s and family worker, returned to full-time teaching, and we welcomed Katie Kitto, now MacDonald, onto the team as a trainee children's youth worker. Our Friday toddler group and kids club has continued to run well with many local families attending. Our youth work is thriving. They've had a great year full of weekly meetings, youth community groups, beach trips, socials, youth camps, and much more. Each week we get to build relationships with well over 200 children, young people and their families. We have also had some great events with the older members of our church. Our Gift of Years ministry have hosted a harvest lunch and an inside picnic for the King's Carnation. They also look out for people pastorally, making regular phone calls and visits to the older members of our church. We've seen a change of leadership to our Friday night soup run, and we have welcomed Susanna as our main soup run leader. They feed 60 to 90 homeless and vulnerable people in Plymouth every Friday night all year round. Kelvin and his team of volunteers at our Love Thy Neighbour Food Crisis Centre see 30 to 35 local families and individuals every week, offering support and emergency food, and many of these families have been linked into our kids club, youth group, AA group and church services. We've run 4 Alpha courses since January 2023, one of which was specifically for youth. We have been able to introduce many people to Christianity, and it's been a really encouraging season for Alpha. We've continued to run other courses to help people in their faith, Foundations, Kintsugi Hope and Freedom Encounters. Our men's and ladies ministries have ran loads of fantastic events over the last year or so, many breakfasts, conferences, weekends away, and the men have started a discipleship group too. Our weekly prayer centre continues to be very popular, with many people gathering each Wednesday to worship, pray and fellowship together. On a more practical note, we were really pleased to raise the money needed to replace our church roof. It was a huge project, so thanks to everyone who gave so generously. And in more recent months, we celebrated Dave's 80th birthday and retirement after 30 years as a pastor at PCC. We also said goodbye to our nursery after 38 years of providing excellent childcare to families across Plymouth. We want to thank all of the staff and leaders that were involved in running Roundabout Nursery for the last 4 decades. 2024 is our centenary year, 100 years since our church first began. And as we look back over this last year or so, the ministries that we have run in and week out, the new beginnings and the closing of chapters, we know that God has been faithful throughout it all. So we would like to say a massive thank you to our church family, to all the people who have volunteered, given their time and finances, and joined with us to worship and reach out to those around us. We are looking forward to what God has planned for us as we celebrate our centenary year together.
I mean, that's worth an applause, I think. That's great. So we're excited. We've got, when Simon Ponsonby here was talking to me and Paul and saying at Oxford that they are very much about down and out, that they are focusing on raising up that next generation and working outwards. And we feel that we're probably at that juncture now where we've got to be raising up younger leaders and younger ministers and focusing on really bringing those through. We've got a great intern program, and we've got excited about the interns that are coming on this year and seeing those develop, and we're just excited for what God's going to do through that ministry as well. So we want to go down and we want to go out and see what God does in this next season. We're praying about what to do about capacity issues and thinking about that too. So appreciate your prayers on that. I hope you're encouraged tonight. I think these Centanery lectures have been really encouraging and wonderful to reflect on 100 years of problem-free church and wonderful family life. But there's much to be encouraged about. We're going to sing a final song. Does anyone know the England result? What? 2-1 to England. Get in there, hey!